Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's video are 4 scary stories featuring Viidith22 and Jar 19. Their channel links will be in the description, so check out their channel if you like their narrations, and make sure you sub to them. Also sub to me if you haven't already, and hit that like button. It will really help out. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. The story that I'm about to tell you took place when I was a teenager. I was living with my family. It was me, my parents, my older brother and sister, and my grandmother. I had a younger sister too, but she and my grandfather both died in a car accident several years earlier. We moved houses not long after. Our new house was much bigger. I think having a smaller, cozier house would have let us feel the absence too easily. In a larger home, we could just dismiss their absence as them being in another room, even though we knew they weren't. Anyway, one Halloween, our whole family minus Grandma were gathered in the living room. We had lit a fire and put a movie on for the evening. It was late and the trick-or-treaters were starting to thin out. The movie was in a bit of a lull when we heard a shriek come from upstairs. Instantly we knew it was Grandma who had screamed, so we all ran up in a panic. As we climbed up the stairs, we could hear her sobbing and saying, "It's you, it's really, really you." She kept repeating that in kind of a hoarse cry as we made our way up to her room. When we got there, she had fallen down onto the floor with her back against the wall. She looked paler than any of us had ever seen her before. Tears streaked her face and her breath was ragged, but her expression was a mixture of bliss and excitement. Standing across the room, dressed in an old-fashioned suit with a hat in his hands, stood my grandfather. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how stunned we all were. None of us are particularly superstitious, and even if we were, that's just not the sort of thing you would ever expect to come across. Had I known what I know now, I would have ordered him out of our house that very minute, but I didn't. My mom was the first one to break down. Seeing her father again brought tears to her eyes immediately, but my grandfather simply smiled and reassured her. We all spoke for what felt like hours, hearing the story of how my grandmother was in her room, getting ready for bed, when she heard a tapping on the window. When she turned, she saw his face there, just peeking in at her. She explained that this wasn't the first time something like this happened. When you lose someone you love, you see them everywhere. But when he didn't leave, and motioned her to open the window, and then climbed in once she had, Grandma knew it wasn't the same. That's when she screamed and we came in. After that, Grandpa regaled us with tales of the other side. How beautiful it is. How all your wildest dreams can't compare to the reality of it. I'd like to tell you that I was skeptical, but I was just happy to see my grandpa again. He explained how, when the time is right, spirits can come back to the land of the living, and there's so much superstition and rituals going on during Halloween that the barrier between the worlds grew thin. He apologized for not visiting sooner, claiming he had tried many times, but simply hadn't had enough experience until this year. And we all believed him. Once all of that was finished, it was best if we left my grandparents alone to catch up. Grandpa stood up and turned to my grandmother and reached out his hand. "I got a lot to tell you. Come with me," he smiled as he said this, a warm, friendly smile. She took his hand, and together they walked down the hall and out of sight. The rest of us went back downstairs, still shaken by what had just occurred. We spent a long time in silence there, by the fire. Trick-or-treaters would still stop by, but even more infrequently than before. Eventually, we got back to talking and joking, almost as if there wasn't a ghost upstairs. It was the best night we had spent together in years. Mother was just telling us a story about Grandpa when he was her age, when the doorbell rang again. It was going on 11 o'clock, so we weren't expecting any more children. A cry of, "Trick or treat," came from outside our door. So my mom stopped her story and went to the door. My mom loved children. She peeked out the front door window and caught a glimpse of the young girl standing there in her pink princess outfit. She swung the door open, not waiting to get a full view of the girl before complimenting her costume. "Well, don't you look, Adore?" Then there was the sound of the bowl hitting the floor. My mother froze mid-sentence. "What's wrong, Mommy?" The voice didn't come from any of us. It came from outside. My father, older siblings, and I looked at each other before racing to the front door. When I got there, my heart leaped into my throat and tears filled my eyes. Standing in the doorway was my younger sister, Sarah. Sarah, the one who had been killed in the car crash years earlier. Those of you who have shared a house with a young child can imagine how deeply their absences felt. There is no aspect of life that they don't affect in one way or another. And when she died, nothing was the same. And there she stood, not a day older, and not a mark on her body. I broke down crying. When I looked around, I saw that my whole family was crying, and Sarah looked deeply troubled by it. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" The voice snapped us all back into the moment. "Of course you didn't, sweetie," my mother replied hurriedly, adding, "We just missed you. Can I come in now?" We let her in, of course. The family then talked like we hadn't talked in years. Sarah was just the same as she had ever been. Back then I would have called her annoying. But that night, there's nothing that she could have done to annoy me, even if she tried. Once we had been back together for about an hour or so, Sarah looked towards my parents. "Mom, Dad, can I show you something?" "Of course you can, honey," my mother said. She still had a tear in her eye. Sarah leapt off the couch. "Great, come with me," holding out both of her hands for my mother and father to take. Suddenly I realized that Grandma was still upstairs and had no idea that Sarah had come back, so I went upstairs to get her. When I got upstairs, I saw my grandfather coming out of the room quietly and shutting the door behind him. When I asked him where Grandma was, he told me that she's resting. I asked him if she could come downstairs, and he simply said that wouldn't be possible, before adding that she would have plenty of time to spend with Sarah. I was excited. "Did this mean that you're staying with us?" I asked my grandfather, and he just smiled and went downstairs with me. My older siblings were chatting in the living room when Sarah came skipping in from around the corner. "Where's Mom and Dad?" I asked. "Well, when we went to the basement, they started kissing and hugging, and told me to go back upstairs, so I did." That didn't sound right. I couldn't imagine my mother leaving Sarah's side for a moment tonight. Nobody else seemed to find it strange, though. Grandpa just laughed and said adults were weird, and I would understand someday. Then he turned to my brother and said he brought him a gift, something to make up for the lost birthdays and Christmases. He held out his hand for my brother to take. "Come with me." It was only at this point I grew suspicious. I asked Grandpa where the gift was, to which he said, "Oh, don't you worry. You'll get yours soon enough." I urged my brother not to go with him, but he didn't listen, taking my grandfather's hand, and the two of them went down the hall together. Sarah turned to us and said, "Mommy and Daddy have been down there for a while. Let's go check on them." She reached out for us. "Come with me." My older sister reached for Sarah, but I slapped her hand away. "Billy, what the? Don't go with her," I begged. "Come on, Meg," Sarah said. "Billy just doesn't want to see Mom and Dad kissing." Before I could stop her, Meg took Sarah's hand, and the two of them went downstairs to the basement. Grandpa started coming back down the hall, alone, and his eyes met mine. "I've got your gift ready now, Billy. Come with me." I ran past him into the room and shut the door behind me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a cell phone yet, and there were no home phones in my room. They hadn't been openly violent yet, but how long was that going to last? All I could do was sit in there and wait for them to either break in or leave. Heavy footsteps come down the hall and stopped outside my door. My grandfather began calling me, begging me to come out so he could give me my present. A few minutes later, his voice was joined with Sarah's, asking me why I didn't want to come and play with her. "Why don't you love me anymore, Billy? What did I do wrong?" She sounded like she was on the verge of tears. I can't possibly tell you how hard it was to stay in there, listening to my little sister beg me to play with her one last time. But the survival instinct is a strong one, and I kept the door shut. The clock chimed 12, and all fell silent. I looked under the door, and my grandfather's figure was no longer casting a shadow underneath. I placed my ear to the door, listened carefully. I heard nothing. My family was out there, possibly hurt. I had to go check, or call for help. Do something at least. I took a deep breath and steadied myself, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Across the hall, through an open door, I could see my brother laying on the ground, motionless. He was pale, and didn't look like he was breathing. I was only in high school, but I ran over to him. I checked his wrist and neck for a pulse, but I found nothing. All I saw was one of his hands was tinged black. I ran upstairs. I should have called the police or an ambulance or somebody, but my mind wasn't working. I found Grandma in the same state, pale, not breathing, her hands slightly blackened. My heart started racing. I had to go into the basement. But I couldn't go in the basement because I knew what I would find. The rest of my family just lying there, pale and motionless, dead. I sat there for a long time, paralyzed, before I decided I had to know. The descent to the basement felt longer than it ever had before. I felt cold and numb. Each step felt like an eternity. But when I got to the bottom, I saw exactly what I knew I would find. My parents and older sister laying on the floor. I began to cry. Cry like I hadn't done in years. Like I hadn't done since my little sister died. "You stupid boy." The voice was sinister and evil. It sounded like every demon in every horror movie you've ever seen, and worse. I spun around, and Sarah was there. But she was different. Her eyes were empty sockets, and her mouth was a black, lipless hole, ringed with fangs. "You have no more family. No more loved ones. They all came with me. They are mine now. And you? You will live the rest of your life alone. You will die somewhere, forgotten, alone, and afraid. You will never see your family again. Ever." Then the thing paused, and let out its hand. "Unless, of course, you come with me. You can be with us all again, forever." I like to tell you now that I kept my distance, that I told her to get out of my house, or at least that I sat frozen. But what she said was true. I felt it deep in my bones. I would never see my family again if I didn't go with her. I was just a kid, a scared, stupid kid who wanted his mom. I stood there shaking, and I reached out my hand slowly. Sarah's mouth formed a sick smile as I approached. Then there was a noise upstairs. The clock chimed 1 o'clock, and I looked up just for a heartbeat. There was a distant scream, and when I looked forward again, Sarah was gone. I called 911, and it was eventually deemed that my family died from carbon monoxide poisoning, and that the leak had spontaneously resolved itself and disappeared through my grandma's open window. My experiences were brought on by hysteria and oxygen deprivation. It could have been worse. They could have blamed me. I was legally an adult at this point, so the estate fell to me. I sold the house and everything in it and moved to a small apartment, using the proceeds to put myself through school after I graduated from high school. If you see a loved one who has passed away this Halloween, please don't let them in. Don't take their hand, and never, ever go with them. You might be asking why I'm sharing this now. It's a fair question. For many years I've been terrified of the things that came to my house that night. For decades, I thought that the scariest thing in the world was the idea of whatever came to visit, whatever we let into our home, that they weren't my family. This year, though, I had a thought that was even more disturbing still. What if they were? I've been on my knees trying to scrub up all this blood and scraps of paper for the last half hour. I'm making some progress, but it's slow, and I keep having to stop when my hands start shaking too much. I'm out of my apartment for the moment, sitting on the floor in the hallway, and I can feel my nerves starting to settle some. I'm going to write this out so I'll have it all on record, and also so I can wait a bit before having to go back in. It started when I was bored yesterday. The internet was out in my apartment. After casting for a couple of hours and trying to read or do some cleaning, I was out of ideas to entertain myself. That's when I saw the box of stationery paper on my desk. My Aunt Emma had given me the stationery as a birthday gift the week before, and there's nothing inherently wrong with such a gift. It was a box of high quality paper and envelopes personalized with my initials at the top of the sheets of paper and on the back fold of the envelope. As a 70-year-old man, I would have probably thought it was cat's pajamas. But I'm a 25-year-old man, so not so much. But still, I was very bored, so I sat down at my desk and started messing around with it. At first I tried writing as neatly and fancy as I knew how. My handwriting is horrible. My best efforts looked like a slow 4th grader, as opposed to a slow 2nd grader. But it was something to do. Then I doodled for a bit, but my drawing skills were equally lacking. I was feeling myself getting drowsy, but then a thought occurred to me of what I should do with the stationery. I'd write a letter to myself. It was a stupid idea, but I thought it was kind of funny too. So I took out a clean sheet of paper and set to work. Hey Scott, how are you doing today? My day was kind of boring. Christy is out of town visiting her parents, and the internet is dead. I have zero ideas of what to do with myself. This is lame. Goodbye. Sincerely, Scott. The novelty of the idea had clearly worn off quickly, but I did fold it up and stick it into an envelope at least, even going as far as to address the letter to myself. Standing up from the table with a sigh, I lay down and fairly soon fell asleep. When I woke up, it was early evening, and the room was dimly lit by the fading twilight outside. I reached over and turned on my bedside lamp, blinking at its brightness. I hated taking naps. I always felt groggy afterwards, and I always had trouble sleeping later on in the night. Rubbing my eyes, I rolled over discontentedly and began getting up. When my eyes lit upon my desk, I sat back down. The envelope with the letter I had written is different now. It was in a different spot for one, but I could tell from the bed it was also a different color and looked like it had a small stain in one of the corners. Standing up and going to my desk, I looked at the envelope closer before picking it up. My name and address were still on the front, but hadn't I written it smaller and more centered than that? Regardless, the envelope itself was definitely different, so clearly I hadn't written this at all. The next thought was that someone came into my apartment to either prank me or try to scare me. The obvious answer was Christine. It didn't really seem like something that she would do, but she was the only other person with the key. After I did a quick sweep of the apartment for intruders, I texted her. She swore that she was still half a state away, and she sent me a picture for proof. She also seemed worried and asked if I had called the cops. But I wasn't at that point yet. I needed to look inside of that envelope first. I pried it open carefully and peeked inside, seeing a light blue piece of paper that matched the envelope and was different than the cream-colored paper that I had used this afternoon. When I unfolded it, I was surprised to see it really looked like my handwriting. But it wasn't the same letter. Instead, it seemed to be responding to me. Good to hear from you. I've been watching you when I can for years, and it seems like the universe has finally given us a way to talk. I'm guessing you live in apartment 3B on Nesbitt Street in Baltimore, right? And your Uncle Tom gave you the box of stationery for your birthday? It's so weird. I guess things have to line up just right. If it actually works and you're reading this, I know it will probably come to you as a shock. I don't think your side knows about us like we know about you, but that's cool. We can swap stories. I'll keep it short for now, but I hope to hear from you again soon. Glory and peace, Scott. I read the letter 3 times. I really couldn't tell that I didn't write it, other than the content itself, which was decidedly weird. Whoever was doing this was either a good prankster, or I had a dedicated stalker that had taken the time to learn my handwriting. Either way, I was calling their bluff. Hey man, good to get a response. So are you like in some other world? That's crazy. Tell me some facts about your world, and we can compare. And if you have some kind of souvenir that you can send next time, that'd be awesome. Looking forward to the next letter. I put the new letter in an envelope, addressed it, and set it on my desk. I then took out my tablet, plugged it in, and set the camera to record at an angle where I could see my desk and the door to my bedroom. I thought about just sitting there and waiting, but the idea was too tedious and would make it less likely that anyone would come back. That was assuming that this wasn't some kind of one-shot joke or harassment. But time would tell. Either way, I decided to go grab something to eat and to go see a movie. 4 hours later, I returned home to another blue letter. I understand you're skeptical, thinking this is all a joke, right? Well, here's some info like you asked, and I sent along something that might help convince you. Our world is a lot like yours, though it's different in some ways. About 40 years ago, we had a lot of animals start dying off. Not all of them, of course, but most of the birds, all of the dogs, and a few other species here and there. Still don't know why, but around that same time, we lost our mirrors. What I mean is, our mirrors stopped showing our reflections. A lot of them just went dark, but some of them, where they have twins in your world, would show your reflections instead. We knew it was reflections because all the writing was backwards, and I could tell from your letters that you don't actually write backwards anyhow. But after that, a lot of people started changing, getting weird or violent. It's stabilizing some now, but it was really bad when I was younger. A lot of people died. Anywho, like I said, things are a lot better now, though we do have some odd stuff pop up and people go missing some. Is your world like that? From what I've seen, and what I know studies people on our side have done, observing active mirrors, it seems like things are a lot better over there. If so, I'm kinda jealous. But enclosed you'll find one of our nickels. It has Robert Kennedy on it. He was president from 1969 through 1977. I don't know for sure, but I think he's one of the big differences between your place and mine. Right back soon. I looked at the back of the envelope and found a nickel tucked in the corner. On one side it had a man's profile, with the name Robert F. Kennedy listed under it. On the other side, it looked like a large turkey glorying over a shield bristling with spears and covered with stars and stripes. What the fuck? I remember my tablet and checked the footage. It actually stopped recording after 2 hours, but it was enough. At the 42-minute mark, I watched my cream envelope give a shudder and disappear. 30 minutes later, a blue envelope had faded into existence a few inches over on the desk. I wasn't sure what to do at this point. I thought about asking Christine for advice, but it would be too hard to explain over the phone, and I didn't want her to worry. I could call the police, but what good is it gonna do? Even if I showed them the video, they probably would think it was fake and I was a jackass wasting their time. I don't know if I believed everything the letter was saying, but I couldn't deny the evidence was compelling. And if this guy really was another me, it could wind up being something really great. I might even become famous for discovering some parallel dimension. But first things first, I needed to write another letter. Wow, so this is big news, right? You're saying that you can see us through the mirrors? Well, that's kind of embarrassing. Could you hear us too or just see us? Do your people have theories on how this happened? Have other people in your world had this happen where they could talk to people from my world? I'm very curious, need to know more. This time I watched as my letter disappeared, only to be replaced with another response a short time later. Yeah, you've got a lot of questions. I understand. No, we can't hear, just see. I don't know if anyone else has actually communicated like this before. No one knows why my world's changing so much. When other things started appearing last year, people said it was the end of the world. That we were being judged. But people are just going crazy, you know? I don't believe in all that stuff. Things are changing and we just have to change with it. Hey, did you say you have a Christine? Is she that hot blonde girl there? She's your girlfriend? I didn't like the tone of the new letter. And I had even more questions now. But I wanted to keep talking to him, so I tried to respond in a way that would make him happy. Yeah, she's my girlfriend. She's great. We're planning to get married next year. Do you have a Christine too? Tell me more about your world when you can. My letter shuddered away fairly quickly, and I waited for an answer, but none came. It was getting late, so I eventually went to bed, though I would wake up periodically and check my desk. Around 6 in the morning, I saw a blue envelope, and I jumped out of bed to read the 2 lines written there. I do have a Christine, but she's a fucking whore. I had to punish her. I hope yours isn't a whore too. I was done. I didn't know what this was, but I knew it had to be real, and I was feeling more and more like it was dangerous. Throwing the letter down, I started looking around my room. I saw a small mirror I had hanging in the back of my closet and yanked it down quickly. hearing it crack as it hit the floor. I tried to think of any others, and the only ones that came to mind were in the bathroom, and the one that Christine hung over the mantel in the living room. Christine! I looked at my phone and saw that it was almost 7. She was going to be back in town this morning, probably coming straight here. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail, like it was powered off. I didn't have her parents' number, so I had resorted to leaving her a voicemail and a text telling her not to come by my apartment, that I would meet her at hers when she got back. I debated on what to do until she arrived, but ultimately decided that I couldn't stand being in my apartment by myself. So I left a note on the door saying, "Christine, don't go into the apartment, call me instead. I'll explain and meet you." And I left the building. For the next few hours I basically drove a circuit between our 2 apartments, occasionally parking outside one place or another. I was sitting outside her place when I got a call from her phone. It was her mother. She said that Christine had knocked her phone into the toilet, getting ready for bed last night, and that they had put in a bowl of rice to dry out. When Christine left to come back home a few hours ago, she must have forgotten it. I felt my mouth go dry. Her mother was asking me what she should do to get Christine her phone, but I told her I'd have to call her back and hung up. Based on when she left, she should have been back at least an hour ago. At that point, I knew she wasn't at her apartment, so I sped over to mine. I saw her car parked down the street from my place, and my head started pounding. Running up the stairs, I reached the door and saw that the note that I left was gone. In its place was a blue sheet of nice stationery bearing a drawing of a red-ink tart and the words, "Come on in my handwriting. I started yelling her name as I fumbled the door open, but as I entered I could tell she wasn't there. The apartment felt empty and lifeless. I ran into the bedroom, stumbling to a stop at the doorway. My mind had difficulty making sense of what I was seeing at first. On the wall next to my desk, there were strips of paper plastered to the wall, making an outline of a small door, about 3 feet tall. The strips seemed to be a combination of blue and cream paper. Speckled here and there were spots of crimson and soggy near the baseboard, where there were partially bloody handprints on both sides, as though someone was trying to hold on. Leading away from the paper door was covered with more blood. As I looked closer, I could see several thick runnels in the wood that I thought first were scrapes or cuts of some kind by something heavy being dragged. But then I saw one of Christie's bloody fingernails torn off the nail bed and ragged, jutting out of one of the grooves she had raked into the floor in her fight to get away. I collapsed on the floor and began crying. After a few minutes I pulled myself together, enough to look around the room for any other clues or some means of helping her. That's when I saw the blue envelope on my desk. You were right, she's a hot one, better than mine even. But I can tell she has the same slutty ways. It's in her eyes, but don't you worry, she'll find less tolerance for that over here. I'll be sure to keep her corrected. Don't bother on trying to come across either, bud. I figured out how to do it. But I'm gonna have to keep that close to my vest. I have to apologize for not being completely honest before. Things are worse here than I let on. Maybe Christine can keep me happy and satisfied with my life. But who's to say? Like I told you, some people are really losing it over here. I might have to come visit again sometime, more permanently. Till then, glory and peace, or as you would say, sincerely Scott. As I'm finishing writing this, I dread going back into the room. I know I have no way of getting her back now, and I know I can't have her blood being found in my apartment. Even without hard evidence, there will be questions when she's reported missing. But all of that is in the background at the moment. I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I look around and see no one. But then I notice in the digibrass door of the elevator across the hall where I'm sitting. The reflection is dark and distorted, but I can see myself in it, or at least a version of myself. It looks like me, but I can tell it isn't, because that version of me is laughing.
It was when winter began to die, a bleak and cold late February, that I first heard them. The driveway to my house had snowed over during the day, and I walked slowly, savoring the way my boots imprinted into the virgin snow, how I changed my surroundings with each step. As I took out my keys to unlock my door, I heard scuffling footsteps behind me. For some reason, I thought of children, maybe because the footsteps were light, or because of the way they slid and jumped through the snow, enjoying the last few scraps of winter. I turned to say hi, my neighborhood being littered with packs of children playing in the street any and all hours of the day. Yet the driveway was empty. Nothing but cold wind and slow-falling snowflakes. I could have dismissed it as my daydream had I not noticed the circle of small footsteps in the snow. I was creeped out, to say the least. I was a teenage girl and not even a particularly brave one. I had seen enough horror movies to decide I wouldn't be the stereotypical white girl who died in the first few minutes of the film. I just slept inside and slammed the door after me, before curling up on the couch with a blanket and my cat, Oreo, a name which my poor sister chose and which, unfortunately, my poor cat was stuck with. She purred softly as I stroked her ears, and I browsed Reddit to distract myself. I sent a message to a group chat with my friends about the footsteps, but the responses were mixed, mostly consisting of either bullshit, okay, big mood, or that happened to my grandma. We found her dead in her house, and her cat had chewed her face off. Alright, that last one I imagined, but that didn't stop me from glancing up every now and then, in fear of seeing a little blonde girl with ponytails and a bloodied dress, or a similar horror movie cliche staring down at me. It must have been half an hour before I noticed the black and white cat standing on the carpet in front of the couch. Her back bent at an unnatural angle, emitting a steady stream of hissing sounds. I jumped up, quite violently, throwing Oreo away. She landed next to the other cat, at which point it became apparent how identical they looked. Not one hair was different, and yet neither seemed to notice each other. Instead, they had both turned to me, hissing, and standing so perfectly still they could have been taxidermied, had it not been for the noise. I backed away slowly, feeling close to hysterical. Keys jingled at the front door and I whipped my head around towards the noise, before turning back to the cats. Only Oreo stood there. Her back fell down from its violent arch. Her legs dropped and she lay down on the carpet. The hissing was the last to leave, transforming into a soft purr. What the fuck? I whispered to myself, running a hand through my hair. The door opened, and from where I stood I saw my older sister step into the house and yell a cheerful, "Hey!" Jenny took off her coat and her shoes and skipped over to the fridge in the small kitchen next to the living room, in an incessantly good mood. She noticed me staring and arched an eyebrow. "Are you okay, Emma?" She popped open the lid of a fruit salad and sat down at the table. Jesus, you won't. It's fucking messed up, okay? Just don't look at me like I'm crazy, alright? But it was probably just a hallucination, but for a second, I swear there was another cat just like Oreo in the room. To my surprise, Jenny laughed and dug a pineapple slice from the plastic carton. Sometimes if I'm really tired, I think that I see two of something. No, wait, that's just when I'm fucked up. Oh my god, you're high, aren't you? She pulled her face closer and stared into my eyes as if to check for dilated pupils. I swatted her arm away and she grinned. Fuck off, I'm not in the mood. Somehow my irritation at my sister seemed to dull my fear, and my memory of the surreal event seemed hazy, unreal. I flopped down on the couch, took out my phone and submerged myself into the familiar world of the internet. The rest of the week was regular, if not plain boring. It was only the next Friday that I heard them again. The snow was melting, turning the ground into a mud that swallowed one's foot with each step. I was running to my house, holding a physics textbook above my head to protect myself from the rain. Of course, I then realized I had paid $80 for that book and tucked it into my coat instead. The whole street was empty and silent, except for the constant pattern of raindrops and my feet hitting the ground as I sprinted. The quiet made me notice the footsteps right away. Just like before, I knew they weren't children's. I turned my head. Nobody was behind me. Was I going crazy? It would be such a cliche if this was the movie trope where it turns out I'm a patient in a mental hospital, just daydreaming everything. I stopped and turned around. I could just about discern footsteps in the mud. Leave me alone. Fucking leave me alone. I suppose I looked crazy, yelling into empty space while the cold rain bit into my skin. I started jogging again, still clutching the heavy book on my chest. I heard footsteps, but they only prompted me to run faster. I flew into the house and shut the door behind me, breathing heavily as I sank down, boots trailing mud into the hallway floor. This time, I stayed far away from Oreo, ignoring her meows. Instead, I curled up under a blanket on my bed, shivering and twitching periodically. I heard the jingle of keys again. I looked out from under the blanket to see Jenny walk in. "Hey." She reached into the fridge and took out a fruit salad, popping off the lid. "Are you okay, Emma?" "What the fuck?" I blurted out. Outside, everything was snowed over. The mud was gone, replaced with pristine, white snow. Jenny took out a pineapple slice and ate it. "Oh, sometimes if I'm really tired, I think that I see two of something. No, wait. That's just when I'm fucked up." "Oh my god. You're high, aren't you?" She pulled my face closer and stared into my eyes, as if checking for dilated pupils. I swatted her arm away. "Wait. No, I didn't swat her arm away. And she couldn't have asked that, because I didn't tell her about the cats." But there she stood, amused, and still holding her goddamn fruit salad. I shook my head, rubbing my eyes and breathing heavily. "Jenny, what did you mean by what you just said?" But Jenny just stood there, smiling, holding the plastic carton in her left hand. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I screamed. She didn't move, but for a slight strain in her smile. I pried the salad out of her hand and threw it on the floor. I stared down at it, my hands trembling. "You okay, Emma?" she said. Jenny stood before me, holding her fruit salad. She took out a slice of pineapple and ate it. And however much I was scared and confused, I lay down on the couch, took out my phone, and stared. I held the phone above my face, even when my hand trembled with exhaustion and I struggled not to drop it. I couldn't pry my eyes away from the screen. In my peripheral vision, I saw Jenna. She popped open the lid of a fruit salad and sat down at the table. I stared at the phone. She took out a slice of pineapple and ate it. I stared at the phone. She popped open the fruit salad and sat down at the table. I stared at the phone. She took out a slice of pineapple and ate it. I stared at the phone. She ate the lid of a fruit salad and sat down at the slice. On and on until dusk fell, and with it my hands seemed to lower on my own accord. As soon as the opportunity came, I ran up the stairs and into my room, slamming the door behind me. Outside of the window, children ran through the mud and the rain inside their homes. "Emma, have you considered maybe going to the doctor?" My friends all nodded along and dug into their lunches. I slammed my tray down on a table in the canteen and sat down. "Oh yeah, sure. Hi, sorry, is this the doctor's office? Yeah, so you know how sometimes days seem to repeat themselves? Literally. Yeah, and sometimes you don't move to the past, and you hear footsteps when there are none, or you don't know. Wait, the mental institute. Forever? Well, shit, guess I'll just kill myself. I mimed hanging myself while my friends looked over skeptically. Emma, look, we all love you and all, but have you considered that this is actually a delusion, and having some medicine for it would help you? Sure, I'll ask my sister. Oh, wait, I smiled condescendingly. My friends rolled their eyes and moved on from the discussion. The day was warm, but a solitary snowflake fluttered into the palm of my hand. The days passed as most days do, chronologically, that is. I spent most of them at friends' houses, afraid of what would happen if I went home. I was almost certain my hallucinations were gone, though, until the middle of March when spring was just barely opening its eyes. As always, I was nearing my driveway when the steps came to me. They seemed more urgent this time. Faster. I willed myself not to turn, but my head seemed to do so on its own accord. I stepped behind me. The steps behind me stopped. Yet there, on the gravel, lay two small shadows. They seemed to move in the breeze. As I started to back away, the shadows seemed to move closer and stretch as my viewpoint changed. One of the shadows dipped into a crack in the road, and in that moment, he shattered. Pieces of the shadow burst out, scattering on the road like leaves in the wind, puzzle pieces I couldn't solve. I turned around and ran into the house. I didn't even bother to shut the door behind me. I waited for her to come, for the keys to jingle. Jenna, stop, look at me. I held the fridge closed as she tried to reach in for her fruit salad. Tell me what's happening. Do you remember it too? The day that repeats. Why is this happening, and who are the footsteps? She said nothing, but those were tears in her eyes. Is it just this house? Is it a curse? Am I just fucking insane? She shook her head, popped open the lid of a fruit salad, and sat down at the table. You okay, Emma? She sobbed. I see. Two of something. I gripped her shoulder. Why are you repeating this? Please. Suddenly, her head shot up. It's glitching, but I can see the code. She jabbed at the air in front of her. I started walking back, tears falling from my eyes as I cupped a hand in front of my mouth. What? What's glitching? I don't understand. She seemed to just appear in front of me, gripping me by the shoulder and staring me in the eyes. I'd never seen her look so disheveled. My sister had been mild and calm, not whatever this was. It is glitching. It's glitching. Do you see? You and me, we're smart. We can see this. We can see the code. We can see it glitching. It's glitching. Do you see? She looked at my face, at the fear in my eyes at seeing my sister like this. She gently swept a rogue tear from my cheek. You okay, Emma? I let out a sob and turned my head away for a fraction of an instant. In that moment, Jenna sat at the table. She took out a slice of pineapple and ate it, and ate it, and ate it, and the air around me seemed fuzzy, wrong. I turned to the open door outside. The snow glittered underneath the settling sun. Oreo walked over to me, and I picked her up, crying into her fur. Without a warning, she hissed and bit me, squirming in my arms. I jerked and dropped her, only to see 4 identical cats on the carpet, backs arched and faces contorted in snarls. I ran for the door, shaking. The second I was outside, my head cleared and I slammed the door. Behind me, there was only a dull crunch as the door met resistance. I turned slowly, fighting a rising nausea. Black and white fur was caught between the heavy metal door and the door frame. It was supposed to automatically close, and even now the door was straining to close fully while my poor cat cried. I screamed and opened the door, letting the cat fall to the ground. There was blood, but I didn't know where it was coming from. Her ribs seemed so wrong, and her legs were twitching even as I saw her jerk in pain with every movement. I picked up her broken body, cradling it. Jenna ran to me, staring at the cat in my hands. "What the fuck did you do? Why did you kill her?" She seemed in shock, mouth agape and face pale. I didn't. She's not dead. We can save her. We have to set the ribs, I think." I touched the broken mass of the body and the cat yelped in pain. I sobbed, and the movement made her cry even harder. Oh God, Jenna, what do we do? Please." I held out the cat, whose breathing turned raspy and yet disgustingly wet. Jenny took a step back, turned her head and vomited on the stairs before our house, on the previously pristine snow. I cried harder, tears streaming down my face. I fought the urge to throw up on the cat. Everything seemed hazy. I only remember the cat being gently taken from my arms and a sickening crunch as I stepped on a branch in the driveway, which sounded too similar to the snap of Oreo's spine. I hope I didn't step on her. There were tufts of fur in my shoelace later. "Mom and Dad, oh God, I'm going to tell them how you fucking put her between the door before you slammed it. I saw you, you fucking psychopath." Jenny was screaming now, but all I could think of was that I was so glad that she hadn't reverted to the thing she had been before. I put a finger on her hand, and she flinched. "Jenny, I swear I didn't. It was following me, and I ran, and it got caught, and I didn't mean to." And we cried together, before burying the body in the backyard, and crafting a painfully small wooden cross to mark the lonely grave. There was no eulogy, only a sullen silence and a ring of small footsteps around the grave. I didn't have to ask Jenna to know that she saw them, but she didn't dare talk about it. I didn't go to school. For an entire week, I stayed in my room, shaking at every sound of footsteps. Mom and Dad seemed absent. I didn't know whether it was just my imagination or if they actually stopped coming home. The days bled together, monotony spreading through my life like a cancer. No one answered my texts. No one picked up their phone. I was alone. It must have been spring, but the calendar was always open to the end of February. And every so often, when I looked at them in my peripheral vision, the trees seemed to be covered in a dusting of snow. It was Saturday when I decided to walk outside. An early evening. The air warm and the world humming with expectation. The sun was still up, but as I stared at the cloudless sky, it twitched from side to side every so often. I decided to lower my gaze, staring instead at the still green grass covering our backyard. I squatted down to run my hands through it, rolling each strand between my finger and my thumb, heavy dew making the strands bend like hunchbacks. For a second, it seemed like I was holding human hair, long and blonde in my palm, and I felt it all over me, inside of me. I jerked up. I turned my head, coughing and retching up a tangled mass. There was a clip in the shape of a ladybug attached to one of the strands, and faint screaming in the background. I shook my head. I knew I couldn't stay inside forever, but all of this, it seemed so wrong. There was nobody outside. None of the little kids running about shouting. All of the houses on my street had their curtains closed and blinds shut. I shut off the fear, the overwhelming feeling of wrongness in the air, breathing eventually. I knocked on the neighbor's house. Some part of me, the cowering little girl inside, wished that no one would answer, so that I could just run back into my room and shut the world out. But there, a rustling in the curtain, and footsteps behind the door. It creaked open ever so slightly, and I took an involuntary step back. It had been days since I had interacted with someone outside of my immediate family. The woman inside, Miss Bailey, didn't step out. "Hi, I'm sorry, I was just wondering whether something's wrong. It seemed like everyone's hiding. I mean, it's stupid, but..." I started, only for the door to slam shut. Her voice was a gravelly whisper, and I barely caught the words. "Don't ask anymore. The foot glitch. They won't tell you. Only awake." Her voice switched suddenly, as if a button was clicked, and it seemed normal then, maybe even too cheery. "Go away now, then. I have dinner to prepare." "Wait, Mrs. Bailey, do you also see the snow?" "Go away now, then. I have dinner to prepare." And so I did. I went away because Mrs. Bailey had dinner to prepare. And even when I considered walking to the other house or just walking out anywhere where there wasn't snow and neighbors with closed curtains and older sisters who took out a slice of pineapple and ate it and took out a slice of pineapple and ate it, took out a slice of pineapple and... I wonder how long it's been. How long I had stayed in my house. How long the food never ran out and the school didn't ring. My friends didn't send me worried messages, and yet I didn't want to go outside. The thought repelled me. Just the mere idea of opening the front door and walking outside made me want to vomit. I don't know what day it was then that I walked downstairs and saw Jenny curled up on the living room carpet. She had her knees firmly pressed to her chest, her head buried between them, and was rocking back and forth, weeping quietly. I approached her hesitantly, because I'd never forgotten the look in her eyes when she told me that it was glitching. Some days, I could see her stand outside my bedroom door, her form breaking the steady stream of light coming from the hallway into my room, still and quiet with a bowed head. Those days, I usually just ignored her, pretending I couldn't see her shoulders shake and her fingers claw at her long, scraggly hair. And in the morning, I pretended I couldn't see her broken fingernails, or the small bald spot she always tried to comb a thin layer of hair over. Today, when I saw her on the ground, I couldn't ignore it. However, it terrified me, the way Jenny was acting. She was my older sister. It wouldn't be right, I suppose. I don't know whether it's callous, but the main reason I helped Jenny was that I feared I would become a bad human being if I didn't. At this point, I didn't really care. I approached her quietly, as one might do with an injured animal. Slowly, I extended a hand over to her and brushed my fingers over her shoulder. It felt hard, as if everything but the bones had disappeared from underneath her clothes. She whipped her head around so quickly her neck cracked, and I jumped back. She looked like Jenny, but it's as if someone had taken out everything inside. She looked hollow, and I worried that just touching her again might make her collapse. I thought about how long it had been since I last saw her, but I can't remember. Every day was the same, except sometimes Jenny was downstairs and other times she wasn't. My hand flew to my mouth, and she reached an emaciated hand out to me. Her cheeks had sunken in and her eyes were empty, mirrors and pools swimming with tears, nothing underneath. I took her hand, rubbing the cracked skin with my thumb. "Hey, Jenny. Jenny, are you okay? I love you. You look so sick. When's the last time you've eaten?" "Oh, Jen, we've got to go to a hospital," I whispered to her as I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her frail body. She shook in my embrace, and I loosened my grip for fear that it'll snap her frail bones if I loved her too much. Just for a second, I felt that I was holding the too heavy body of Oreo, and I jerked back, pulling her along with me. We stumbled on the carpet and fell down together, my hands still locked around her frail body. I closed my eyes in hopes of shutting out the sickening crunch and covering my ears so I couldn't see her tiny body hit the floor. Except the sickening crunch was a tree branch, and my hands were locked around her, and she was the oldest sister. My sister was older and had a pineapple in her hand, except there was a sickening crunch, and she sat down before me, on the carpet. She hadn't arched back just like Oreo had when I dropped her, except she was weeping rather than snarling. I had let go of her, I suppose. And then, in her arms, cradled like a baby and swaddled in fabric, which looked like my mom's favorite scarf, was a gun. Shit! I scrambled back. Jenny, what are you doing? How did you don't have a gun. What the fuck is happening? She convulsed for a second, shaking and bending over to vomit nothing onto the carpet floor for a second. Then she lifted up her head and cocked it to the side, breathing rapidly. Emma, you have to fucking kill me. I choked and my hands flew over my mouth. Somehow, the fact that she swore shocked me just as much as her request. I had never heard Jenny swear before, except for when Oreo... Except then. Emma, please. The gun. I took it from her quickly, not because I wanted to shoot her, but because I was terrified she would do it herself. Her fingers brushed the trigger with a moth-like touch, adorningly, lovingly. I stood up, but then immediately sat back down, my legs shaking and weak. Jenny, I'm not going to kill you, Jenny. I won't shoot you. I repeated it, and even in my head, I had a constant anthem of don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot, as if I was worried that I would absent-mindedly murder my sister. Why not? She stood up then, with confidence that I didn't expect. Her eyes stared over me, around me, under me. Where's Mom and Dad, Emma? Where? You know where? I shook my head. She said the last question with the same tone I had heard her use on the students she tutored, a simpering, borderline patronizing tone that usually made me roll my eyes or throw a sly middle finger in a direction. Somehow, though, although she looked frail and weak, I felt compelled to listen to her. You know where? They're here. They're in the house, in the basement. I shot them. It was loud. I know you heard it, but you stayed in the goddamn room like always. I shot them because they begged me to. You understand? They begged me, and I did it. I'm not a fucking coward like you. She spit at my feet, and I watched the trail of saliva from her chapped lips to my blue socks with butterflies on them. I wrapped my arms around myself, dry heaving and weeping at the same time. When I looked up, she was still staring at me, her head cocked and saliva slowly dripping from her chin to the floor. Why did you kill them? I whispered. Because that's the only way to get out. And with that, she took my hand in her skinny fingers and pushed the gun into her chest. Do it, Emma. She looked outside, her eyes wide. It's snowing again. I think I like it more when it's snowing. I tried to pry my hands away from her, but she seemed stronger than she usually did, even as she shook with fear. I wish it wasn't true, but the only thought running through my head was that I didn't want to be alone. I couldn't be alone. She couldn't be so selfish as to leave me trapped here. I can't do it, Jen. I love you so much. I was crying, but my hands were steady as I pried the gun away from her. If you loved me, you'd do this. You'd see that I'm suffering. I can't. They're in my head, and don't. It's glitching. Don't do it. But I can't hold them off any longer. And every day is just the same day in hell. I'd rather die, so please. She shrieked and grabbed her head. Why can't you do it yourself? Don't you think I fucking tried? Something stops me from pulling the trigger. Emma, please. I love you so much. She clawed at her head and convulsed, alternating between reaching for my hand and pulling away from me. My finger brushed the trigger, tantalizing, slowly, a lover stroking their parent's hand, a gust of wind like a butterfly kiss. It occurred to me then, and I ran from my room and locked myself inside, pulling the curtains shut over the picturesque winter landscape, locking the door. I could hear her breathing and moaning behind it. I sunk to the floor, burying my head inside my knees. The gun was still in my hands, and my sister, I didn't know, because there was something inside of her, something that made her want to kill herself, and something that wanted to stop it. Except for the love of God, I can't figure out which is my sister, and if I kill Jenny, or if I kill her, then I'm alone. If I don't, then she's here with me, and I don't know which idea terrifies me more. It's still glitching. Everything. My phone works, but no one ever replies. There's no one. No one. There's no date, no time. The clock hands spin and stop and spin, and I can still hear her moaning and breathing behind my door. Voices whisper to me. I had to try to write this, even though there's no one out there. There's no one. There's a circle of footsteps in the snow below the house, and every morning I wake up with the curtains open when I closed them the night before. Please, if anyone knows what's happening, help me. Help my sister. I'm terrified, both of her and of what's happening. I'm 13. I don't remember where I go to school. My house doesn't have an address anymore. If you hear the footsteps, it's glitching for you too. Follow them. Find me. Help me. Please help me. It's a glitch, and I can hear her screaming. And the sun is gone. It's gone. The world is snow and footsteps, and I'm Jenny. She's dead, and I'll shoot her, and I will, and she popped open the lid of a fruit salad, and it spilled out on the virgin snow. Help me. It's glitching, and I'm dead. 2 days ago, I found this journal at home while cleaning out the attic. Neither me nor my family have ever seen it before, but out of curiosity, I read the whole thing. The date inscribed in it is May 24th, 2019. Last night, a circle of footsteps appeared in my front yard, the shadows of the imprints bleeding into the snow, and I think when I hear them, I should follow.
Welcome, my friend. Get comfy and sit, for this story's abound with dread, I admit. We have a young woman, Sachi's her name. She could not have known, so do not cast blame. It all began well, not so long ago, when Sachi still lived in her dear Kyoto. The year 96, or perhaps 95. School life was good, Sachi felt so alive. Friday had come, the day almost through. On her way back to class, she met Masaru. He was quiet and cold, an odd sort of boy. His eyes were just blank and devoid of all joy. He stood perfectly still and stared at her face. Sachi just froze. Her heart started to race. "Hello," she said, hiding her grief. Then Masaru smiled. He was missing some teeth. Shocked and in fright, Sachi started to leave, to just move away and gain some reprieve. As she slowly escaped, she could feel his stare, but turning to look, he was no longer there. Preceding the day, he fell from her mind. There was so much to do, her workload unkind. A project was due, so she'd have to stay late. She always worked hard, a terrible trait. Hours then passed since the ring of the bell. The sun disappeared,
and darkness had fell. With a yawn and a stretch, it was time to head home, so she packed up her stuff, and the halls she did roam. Sachi wandered her way and hummed a new song, when deep in her gut she felt something was wrong. She walked to the window, now growing in fright. She looked out through the glass and into the night. From where she was stood, on the school's higher floor, she saw a figure downstairs walk in through the door. Sachi shot back, not sure what to do. It was then at that point she recalled Masaru. For a moment she froze. It just couldn't be. She thought to herself, did he wait here for me? Calming herself and clearing her head, she'd find a new exit and leave there instead. So she then turned around and walked at a pace. She tried to keep quiet, it was all just in case. As she got to the stairs, Sachi did stir. There were footsteps approaching and coming to her. Thinking the worst, she ran for the loo and waited to see who came into view. Sat still and waiting, the steps drawing near, the figure appeared and gripped her in fear. There stood a man, or a woman perhaps, a being so dire it makes courage collapse. Tall, slim and robed, sleeves draped down its thighs, and an old matted mask that covered its eyes. Its mouth could be seen, so pale and thin, then it raised up its head and formed a mad grin. Turning its head, it scanned left and right. Sachi was frozen for fear of its sight. It took a sharp turn and a few steps away, which gave Sachi hope she would not have to stay. That hope was short-lived, and the prospect to flee, when a voice then called out with a playful, Sachi. This stabbed at her heart with great fearful pains. Her blood then ran cold and froze in her veins. It was looking for her and checking each room. If it came back around, this would be certain doom. It opened a door and entered the class. Now was the time for her to haul ass. She then stepped outside, a cold sweat on her cheek. As she got to the stairs, she heard a low squeak. The door to the ladies had sounded its closure. Sachi did what she could to retain her composure. Not hearing a thing, she made her way down. She'd find the first exit and flee into town. Halfway down the stairs, where the floor became level, there came a small laugh, a sinister revel. Sachi looked up, and that's where it stood, smiling a smile no sane person should. She then tried to run, to break from the fray, but the being had jumped and was now in her way. Through the great shock and the whole evening scares, she shoved at the figure and it fell down the stairs. A great many thuds then came to a stop, as the person lay still and a silence did drop. Sachi stepped down in a mournful regret. She'd acted in fear against a possible threat. She feared that perhaps it had all been a joke, now taken too far with one single stroke. She stared at the person and could now barely stand, but felt a cold chill when a twitch moved their hand. Sachi then backed away from the thing on the floor. Then its neck snapped towards her and laughed with a roar. The laugh carried out and bounced off the walls. Sachi then ran to escape down the halls. She took several turns, but could hear it approaching. She decided to hide from the danger encroaching. She ducked in a closet and did not make a sound, standing perfectly still, hoping not to be found. A rapid succession of footsteps was heard. They ran past the closet as if undeterred. Some moments then passed, which felt like forever. Sachi opened the door. It was now or never. As she stood in the hall, there was no one about. She then took a step, and the lights just went out. As fast as she could, she covered her scream. Sachi just couldn't wake from this terrible dream. Silent and slow, she continued her path. From deep in the school, there echoed that laugh. She spun right around, but was still stepping back, listening close, so just to keep track. Set on her course, hands clenched in her lap. She stopped on the spot when she heard a light tap. Unable to move while stricken with dread, all Sachi could do was to just turn her head. Outside the window, in awful surprise, was a tall silhouette with 2 gleaming eyes. Just as with the other, it's a sight to abhor, except with this one, a veil covered its jaw. An uncovered face, save for its long hair, Sachi just couldn't break from its harrowing stare. It punched at the glass, which snapped her awake. The window did crack. "Just run, for God's sake!" She sprinted away as it clambered inside. It laughed something cruel with a predator's pride. "Run, little girl," the monster had said. "Enjoy every second before you are dead." The words cut her deep as she continued to run. If these creatures caught up, she'd surely be done. She ran on, taking turn after turn. Her breath became dry and her muscles did burn. The laughter and calls of the 2 sounded out. It took all she could not to scream, yell or shout. It was all just too much, and it looked like the end, until Sachi took that one final bend. There was the exit. She was almost in tears, to flee from this place and all of its fears. Closer and closer, feet pounding the floor, she outstretched her hand and pulled at the door. With a pull and a heave, the door opened wide. Freedom was there from the creatures inside. Our girl got away. There's no need to cry. I could tell you that, but it would be a lie.